This is a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast.
Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Today we're talking to Professor Maree Toombs.
Hello, how are you? I'd put my poshy voice on.
You sound very posh.
Professor.
I don't know whether I've got the right title for you, Maree. I think it's Deputy Dean and Professor, Faculty of Medicine and Health, University of New South Wales. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Yeah, well, look, today I want to talk about your incredible career because you have been up and down and had lots of journeys on your way to success, and you're quite an inspiration as a friend and a professional woman. You are you're a lay and Coomba woman?
Oh, not bad.
No?
Urali Coomba woman.
Okay, and where is that? That's
okay.
Cootamundra?
No, so I grew up in Cooter, so that's where you'd be getting that connection from. And Cootamundra's in the southwest slopes of New South Wales. But my country and where my mob come from are the Urali peoples from a place called Gadooga. And Gadooga's northwest of Lightning Ridge, and then over the border into New South Wales, where my other mob are, the Coomba peoples, and we come from around that Bollen area.
Okay, so today is National Sorry Day, which is a day where we say sorry to the stolen generations. What's your take on Sorry Day, and what's your family connection to that?
Yeah, it's very important. We don't know the history of Aboriginal Australia and that truth-telling piece around what's happened in this country has been almost deafeningly silent. And so to celebrate something like Sorry Day, to remember those children that have been removed, is really, really important. And for me personally, in Cootamundra, it was the site in New South Wales where all of the Aboriginal girls were removed to. And so there was a home there, and it was called the Cootamundra Girls' Home. And whilst I wasn't part of that story, I was witness to the impact that had. Another connection that I have to the stolen generations, or at least the policy that sat around that, was my father used it as a mechanism to gain full custody of me when I was 7. Because my mother, who is Aboriginal, wanted to leave the marriage. And I remember this day, my father taking myself and my brother up to the local courthouse, and we stood in front of a magistrate or a judge. It looked really scary. He was up in his little high box with his little hammer. And my father saying to him, "I want full custody of my children," pointed to us, and proceeded to tell the judge that my mother had a mental illness and that she was Aboriginal. And I remember being 7 and watching the judge's face, and he looked at my brother and I, turned to my father, completely discarded the mental illness and said, "She's Aboriginal," as in my mother. And my father said yes. And with the stroke of a pen, my father had full custody of us. My mother had no knowledge of it. We went back home, and my dad said to my mother, "You can leave the marriage, but you can't take these children." And so she was stuck in this horrible marriage until I was almost 18.
Wow, what an incredible story.
Yeah.
And did your own mother and her ancestors, did they have any contact with the stolen generations? Do you know?
Well, there were so many different sort of mechanisms, I suppose, within the policies around Aboriginal peoples. My family directly did not and were not part of the stolen generations, but they were part of forced removal from country and placed on what are called missions. So Cherbourg mission, which is 2.5 hours northwest of here, in Toowoomba, was the site of where they were sent and then separated from each other. So it was a different type of process, but what essentially it did was remove mothers from their children. And so that was the process that my grandmother was exposed to, and she was taken from her mother when she was 6 and removed from Cherbourg Mission and put onto Palm Island. Yeah, so it's quite a web of different interactions that Aboriginal peoples have had with the policies in this country, and some forcibly removed, some misplaced because of these missions and reserves and the systems that took place on all of that. But to be clear, the process was to whitewash us. So it was very much about take the Aboriginal out of us, replace it with this Western system, which was so foreign to many of us. And if you understand who we are as Aboriginal people, our cultures are beautiful. It's all about family. It's all about connection to each other in this collective of everybody is taken care of. And so that has been significantly disrupted. So, and the last thing I'll say on that is we are the oldest surviving civilization in the world. We're 65,000 years old. Just outside of Toowoomba, there's a traditional site carbon dated by the University of Queensland. It's 8,000 years. That's older than the pyramids. So that's how long we've been here. And whilst we have had these awful things happen to us, we are survivors and we're still here.
Beautifully said too. I want to talk some more about your childhood a bit later on, but what I do want to talk about is your incredible career and what you're doing with yourself at the moment. So tell the listeners and tell me, because sometimes I just find it hard to keep up.
So what I'm doing now? Okay, well, I'm currently the Deputy Dean, Indigenous, in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of New South Wales, which is a mouthful. But I'm the inaugural Deputy Dean there, and my role is really to create culturally safe spaces for our sovereign peoples. So that's our Indigenous peoples that work within the Faculty of Medicine and Health, and to create pathways for Indigenous peoples to come into medicine and allied health and to thrive. And that's my remit, but it's also about standing up a well-being place. So this will be within this brand new building that's going up currently. It's flash as, and within that space we can have our own cultural identity, but also we can bring allies into the space and teach and create a place that the university can be proud of. And that university is very much leading the way around these types of initiatives and was the forerunner for all things referendum. So Uluru Statement of the Heart. We're looking at a micro treaty within that university as well. So it's very progressive and it's actually a really amazing place to work.
What does that look like, Maree? What does a sort of what's the end goal? What are we hoping to? More Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people studying at university, removing the barriers? Is that
all of it? Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's where our Aboriginality doesn't matter. That we have health equity, and that through that equity, our students can come through with the same starting point as other people do. And at the moment, we've still got a bit of a way to go to catch up, to be on the starting line with other people, but we're slowly getting there.
Well, tell me some more about that. What does that mean? Because you will often hear people in Australia say, well, we all just have to sort of pull our socks up and we've all got the same opportunities. Everything's equal in this country.
Yeah, well, that's well, it is. But I would have agreed with that once. Yeah, only because that's what I was told. And it's not true. And it's not true because of our race. And so let me explain. So we have our nationality. So we can all say we're Australian. And we can all define our ethnicity. So I'm Aboriginal Norwegian. Your background is your background. So that's our ethnicity. But what we can't escape is how we are defined by the colour of our skin, and that's race. So if you're Aboriginal and you're brown-skinned, you will be discriminated against. And that's just as sure as I sit here. I've witnessed it whilst I don't get challenged about my race as much as an adult because I look like this. As a kid, it was horrific, and a lot of violence around that as well. And so being measured by your skin colour on where you fit in the scheme of things is what measures our success as well. And so if you are of white privilege, and you don't know what discrimination looks like, then your starting point is 100 yards up the road. But for those that are judged by their skin colour and what that looks like, they're down the road. And so this whole piece about equity is how do we bring it to an equal footing? And we've got a lot of work to do in the space.
I know me bringing up the voice is probably going to be fairly controversial, but I'd like your thoughts on it. People say, and I've just spent a couple of weeks out in Alice Springs doing work in an Aboriginal medical centre out there, and you view things totally differently. And people say, what's the answer? Why aren't we making progress on closing the gap, particularly on those health and incarceration and all of that, those statistics? And people say, well, it has to be community-led and we have to have Aboriginal people leading with the answers. But the voice was that. We asked them, what you wanted, and you told us.
Yeah, and everybody said no. So once again, we have this moment in time where we could have made a substantial difference and we didn't. And it was caught up in, a very simple slogan that was, if you don't know, vote no. But had anybody taken the time to actually look at what that was, and I think that the Labor Party let us down too, because they did a terrible job in explaining what this was. But that was really about acknowledging that we are the First Peoples and addressing this whole piece about funding and creating models of care that were actually going to be successful in these communities. And if I give you an example of what funding looks like at the moment, we've got a piece of pie, a pie. So let's just say it's $1 million pie. And we're going to drop it into an Aboriginal community to address smoking cessation. So the pie doesn't go to the community. The pie goes to a non-Indigenous organisation outside the community that gets $1 million. So let's call the organisation Timbuktu. I don't know, I'm just making this up. But Timbuktu gets $1 million. So the first thing they're going to do is take 25% of the pie for their administration costs. Then they're going to employ their own people, maybe sitting in Brisbane, to go out to deliver the smoking cessation education program to a little remote community somewhere in Queensland. One person within that community, probably an Aboriginal health worker who hasn't got enough to do already, will be paid a tiny amount of money to help recruit the people that that organisation needs to tick the boxes for the funding that they just received. So it doesn't work. And it's going to continue to be like that until we actually do start to listen to what Aboriginal people say, and not only listen but follow through.
Yeah, it's something that we just haven't got the model right, obviously. Yeah.
Well,
Tell me
about listening and thinking about, like, we have got the answers. And it's this whole paternal idea that we've got the answers, but we won't really do that because we actually want to do this. So it's about deep listening and following through with what people are saying is required.
You're on Big Little Small Talk. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Maree Toombs. Well, she's Dr. Maree Toombs and she's Professor Maree Toombs, all of those things. Tell me about your work with the suicide intervention programs.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm very proud of, and also something I think that is a good example of when you do listen to communities. So I was funded, it was $840,000 back in 2016. So it was a large National Health and Medical Research Council grant. So they're like category 1, they're flash grants. So I got one of those. So I thought I was like pretty cool. And but it was designed to yarn with communities around how and what addressing suicide in those communities would look like. And just for the audience, we have the highest rates of suicide in the world. And if you're an Aboriginal person aged 15 to 39, the highest rate of mortality for that group is suicide right now in this country, on the 26th of May. So when I went into a number of communities here in southeast and southwestern Queensland and yarned with mob, what they actually said was basically our kids don't kill themselves between the hours of 9 and 5. We can't rely on fly-in, fly-out services. We need something that we can do in real time. And so we started to build a program around an existing Western program called Assist. And the reason we went with that is, well, 2 reasons. The first one is suicide isn't an Aboriginal disease. There's no word for suicide that we can find in any language that we've worked with, and we've been working with about 94 different Aboriginal communities. So it didn't exist prior to colonisation, and the first known case of suicide by an Aboriginal person in this country was in about 1984. So this is new. So the second reason we went with this program called Assist is because my brother was at risk of suicide and was putting out a whole lot of warning signs, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I rang our parents and said, hey, said these things about my brother, and they said, we'll have a talk to him, but nothing was working. So I went and did this Assist training so I could see what an intervention program looked like, and found myself asking my brother on day 1 of that training whether he wanted to kill himself. And can you imagine asking your brother that? But this training actually gave me the skills to do it. And I did it in a text message because I was too chicken to ask him. And it was like, went something like, hey, I'm doing this training. You might think I'm crazy, but I'm going to ask you anyway, ... Are you thinking about killing yourself, ... It was brutal. Sent it, and he texted me back and he said, how did you know? And so I just rang him, and we spoke through everything, but following this training that I had. And it's really about noticing when someone's not right, and we have Are You OK Day, but this is just noticing that something's not right. And sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's really obvious. Like with my brother, he was screaming, I don't want to be here anymore. And we're all going, oh, don't be silly, and just dismissing it because we didn't know what to do. So it's the noticing and it's asking directly. Because if you say you're thinking about doing something silly and they say yes, it might be that they want to, go skinny dipping at 2 a.m. It's very different to ending your life. And then hearing story, which is very much part of who we are as Aboriginal people, like deep listening. But what you're doing is you're listening for a life voice. So you want to hear there's a hesitation in them not being here anymore. And most people there is. So you're listening for what's called the life voice, and then you work with the person around how they can see themselves staying safe for now, whatever that might be, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever, and what supports they can put around themselves. So that program has been extremely successful. We've trained over 10,000 people to date. We took it into a community locally here and saturated that community in this training, and there hadn't been a suicide in that community for about 18 months. So it actually works. And that particular community came up with all the reasons why and how to roll it out. And they also had stickers that they put on doors of houses to say this is a suicide safe house. And so that's an example of a grant, $840,000, that has had a reach of 10,000 people. So I'd say that was pretty good bang for buck.
What would make an Aboriginal program different to a white person's program? How do you tailor it for Aboriginal people?
I don't think the concepts are different. I think the cultural aspects are. And I suppose where we are different in some ways is that we're a collective society. So the way that our kinship systems and family structures are is it's one for all and all for one. And, I could be yarning with an Aboriginal woman on the street that I've only known for 10 minutes, and I'm calling her auntie or she's calling me cuz or sis. So we're always looking for these connections with each other. And so the way that my programs have worked and why they've been so successful is because people will be part of the research for the common good of everybody. So it's not I'm going to do this for myself, I'm going to do this for my community, and because I care about, whatever it is that is being put in front of them. And that's why programs fail when funding goes into communities without speaking to the communities about what their priorities are. And my programs have been successful because all I did was listen and chased funding for what these communities ask for. Like, it's not rocket science,
Maree, is it always important to try and get some key figures in any community on board and help them? And are those key figures tired and worn out because they're approached by the everybody as to try and get them to, I don't know, all the programs that are coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we call it a cultural load, but I actually think it's more of a colonial load because it is driven by funding and people that are trying to do the right thing but knowing that they have to have those connections within community. So we have done a lot to address that through national funding bodies like the National Health and Medical Research, which is based in Canberra, where when you go to these communities now, the first one is around benefits. So what's the benefit to the community? So that workload or wayload on community members is reduced because the benefit has to be two ways. So not just coming from the funding provider. Reciprocity is another one. So that once again is like, what's the benefit both ways? Community engagement. So there's about 5 principles around that. But it still doesn't take away that load that generally falls to the helpers in the community that want the best, but they get burnt out really, really quickly. And also, because these communities now are quite fragmented and the communities are not necessarily all from that country, it's about working out the politics and who are the key people, but are they really the key people? And so you have to have a relationship, and it's not a relationship that you can develop over a week. It's a long-standing relationship to understand communities before you can really start to engage in an effective way.
So true. Tell me, you said you can meet someone and sort of when you work out who your mob is and whatever, and then you're calling each other auntie and sis and whatever. Is that true for Indigenous people all over the world? And tell me about when you went to Canada and what sort of thing you were doing there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to think about that. I don't recall seeing that.
The reason I ask, Maree, is because I remember at the time you were staying with some Indigenous people and I said, wow, how did you get to do that? And you said, because we kind of recognise each other as Indigenous people of whatever country. That was more where I was going with that question.
Absolutely. There's definitely that kinship because there's just a sense of knowing when you're Indigenous. So, the story that I think you're referring to was being in New York in this very kind of dusty little precinct. It was quite scary. And the people that were renting the place off, they were ex-Broadway stars, and they were these big flamboyant kind of, really out there. And they said, come to our church. And so we thought, we'll go along to their church. Anyway, it was the weirdest thing I've ever been to. And they were atheists. So they had these masks, like scary masks and stuff everywhere. And so Dan and I are in there going, what have we just walked into? This feels like hoodoo voodoo land. And this other poor unsuspecting victim, Laurel, her name was there with her son. And I'm looking at her and she's looking at me, and we just started talking, and I could tell that she was First Nations or Native American, and I asked her. And anyway, so she came from this beautiful community called the Shinnecock, and the Shinnecock Nation is on Rhode Island, and this reservation sat right in the middle of the Hamptons. And so, for example, Billy Joel's property backed onto their reservation, and Seinfeld, and it was just the weirdest thing. So she said, come up for the weekend. So off we went, and it was a wild weekend. I just remember being warned about the cat. And I'm like, who's the cat? And the cat was one of her uncles that would just sort of slink around in the night and just kind of show up on whoever's couch, on whoever's house at whatever time. And so it was kind of like, if this man just sort of appears in the night, it's all right, we just call him the cat. He's harmless. So I'm sleeping with one eye open all night waiting for some guy called the cat to show up.
And did you compare stories of sort of indigeneity, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting in the US because, we hear a lot about the African Americans and their story, but the Native American story is a little bit like here, like the silence is deafening, but in a lot of ways it's a lot harsher because people stay on the reservations. It's really hard to get off them because they're grounded in poverty, and if you leave, you've got heavy taxes, and you actually are leaving at ground zero to try and, commence a new life. Whereas if you stay on the reservations, there's like a bucket of money that goes to the chiefs, and they decide how to disperse it within the community. So it's just different. Yeah,
and
it's
yet the
just
same.
different. Very much the same.
Thanks for tuning in to Big Little Small Talk. We're talking to Maree Toombs, who is an Aboriginal woman who grew up, you didn't grow up in Toowoomba, but you've spent a big chunk of your time here. Maree, tell me about Indigenous Australians and health, the wombat in the room.
Oh,
What is
the
that?
wombat. Oh, that was just a play on words around the elephant in the moon. The elephant in the moon. Elephant in the room. But yeah, that was really to address
What is it?
disparities.
It's a book?
So it's a book.
No.
A textbook for students, and I wrote that with a colleague when I was at the University of Queensland. So I was working here in Toowoomba at the Rural Clinical School, and I was tapped on the shoulder to be the Director of Indigenous Health, which was a response to creating curriculum for medical students who were going to obviously become doctors on how to work in culturally safe spaces. And so any medical student in this country by law is taught about Indigenous history, culture, and then the social determinants of health. And this is part of the Australian Medical Council, who accredit medical programs across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so this book was a spin-off of a course that I had written with a colleague, and we thought, well, we'll just write a textbook to accompany the course, which we did. And it's been quite successful. It's sort of been made a little bit more redundant by much more progressive textbooks over the years, but it had its place in its space, and it had humble beginnings, but it was nominated for a Oxford University Press award, and it was published by them, which is a pretty credible publishing company.
Well, that's just one of the incredible things that you've done. Let's go back to you growing up in Cootamundra. You're an Aboriginal girl, fair bit of racial discrimination, maybe not even as much, I don't know, like because you were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and is a different sort of discrimination, I would imagine, where people saying, oh, you're not Aboriginal.
Yeah, it was a real juxtaposition and a real, it's funny, like, how I don't even know where to start with that because it's so complex. I guess my mother is overtly a beautiful brown-skinned Aboriginal woman with big brown eyes and the curly hair, and we were only one of two families that identified as Aboriginal in that town, and everyone else was Italian. But they weren't Italian, they were Aboriginal too, but they just weren't overtly identifying because they knew how hard life was to do that. So whilst I look like I look, my brother is very brown-skinned and also very Aboriginal, but we've both got these blue eyes. And so he copped it a lot more than what I did. And I found that I was teased less in the wintertime because my skin would go paler. And so when I spoke about that skin colour business earlier, it really defined me. So if I sat in the shade at the swimming pool in summertime where everyone else was rolling around in reef, oil, and their skin was getting really black because they wanted to look really tanned, I was the girl under the willow tree because I didn't want my skin to go brown because it meant more prejudice. But I had some really awful experiences. So my name in Cootamundra was Jin, Bung, or Abo. So that was how I was referred to. And, that has a profound impact on you. And so to be proud of my Aboriginality, I wasn't. And I was embarrassed by it because when you're spoken to like that, it makes you feel yucky and dirty, actually, because there was a connotation that because of the colour of my skin I was dirty. So I used to wash with soap and get my skin so clean because I thought if I did that I wouldn't be teased. But it's this skin thing. And interestingly, I just did this amazing program last week called Courageous Conversations, and it's about race and racism, and this was something that we organised within the Faculty of Health and Medicine to look at a concept called white privilege, which makes white people feel very uncomfortable about. And so this was 2 days of very uncomfortable, courageous conversations, and it was facilitated in a way that brought us all to a beautiful place at the end. But in that, we were shown some images of ads, and we had to pick up what the discrimination was in that. And one of them was a soap ad, which I found really triggering. So it was Dove, and it was 3 women with a before and after sign behind them, and the Dove soap sort of sitting in the middle of the advertisement. And on the far left was a brown-skinned woman. In the middle, so that was in the before shot, and then in the middle between before and after was an olive-skinned woman, so probably more like me. And then on the after side was a white woman. Oh. And so the Dove soap was saying, if you clean your skin, then you'll look like that. And that subliminally must have been something that I picked up as a kid, because I had this thing about the soap, and I would have 2 showers a day and just be very, like if I look clean and I smell clean, then no one's going to tease me about my colour, but it didn't make a difference.
So Maree, you were going to high school and had a group of friends and things. Did you finish school in Cootamundra?
No, I didn't. No, my parents separated halfway through grade 11, and then my brother and I most happily left Cootamundra to move back to Brisbane, which is where a lot of my Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal family lives. So I was born in Brisbane, and then we went down south, and it was so liberating. I went to a new school, place called Balmoral High, so Bulimba, which is now a big flash suburb. Back in the days, they called it Beaumongrel. It was rough as. And, and I went to school there, and no one cared about my Aboriginality. No one asked, no one anything, but I dropped out. Yeah, I got to August, and I was just being a rebel. My parents had separated. I was on a very tight leash, and all of a sudden I wasn't, and I just thought school's not for me. So I dropped out.
And what happened to you? Where did you find your predicament? I'm not sure, when you were about 17, 18?
So my pregnancy, yeah. So I was 17, and I fell pregnant. And I actually went to the doctor and asked to go on the pill, and he said no. I was 17. He said, no, you go home and you bring your mother back and we'll talk about it. And I'm thinking, I'm not going home to tell my mother I want to go on the pill. And so I fell pregnant, and I had a beautiful little boy when I was 18, Eli. And life was hard. So his father and I, we stayed together for 4 years, but he also had a lot of trauma in his life, and we parted ways amicably. I had this little boy, and so I was working in kitchens as washing dishes and as a cleaner. I was picking grapes in Western New South Wales. So, life was looking pretty grim for me there for a little while. But I also knew in myself that I was much better than that. And so my beautiful grandmother, my white grandmother, when I was 22 years old, did a major intervention on me, and she cornered me in her backyard with scones and all sorts of treats and said, here's some paperwork for a bridging program at the University of Southern Queensland. I've made a time for you to go and have an interview at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and you will be there. And I went, yes, Nana, and off I went. But her words always rung in my ears from as young as I can remember, and she would always say, education is so important, dear. They were her words, and she was right. She was so right.
How do you think that she had heard about the bridging program?
She had enlisted the help of her So a family relative, so he was a school teacher at St. Peter's, I think it was, in Brisbane, and he was pretty high up there, and he knew about bridging programs and enabling programs for Aboriginal people. And so this university out here had a bridging program for Aboriginal people and a bridging program for non-Indigenous people. It was the same program. The only difference was the Aboriginal program had some Aboriginal educators in it, and then the non-Indigenous one had non-Indigenous educators. And so that was he was the one, Bruce his name was the person that found the information and equipped my grandmother with it, and the rest is history.
You were working, you had a little boy, you were working at the seminary in Brisbane with your mother,
Megsy.
cleaning.
Yes.
And who did you meet?
Oh, well, I was in the kitchen like Cinderella washing my dishes and hating men. And I thought I'll take this job in a seminary where there's Catholic priests, and I think I'm going to be quite safe, in this place. And this very good-looking guy comes strolling along the cloister one day in his cowboy boots and his red and white check shirt and jeans. And I'm thinking, who's that and what's he doing in this place? And as it turns out, seminarians, of which there were about 50 young men. And had I known that, I wouldn't have taken that job. But they don't need to take the act of celibacy until 5th year. And my husband was about 6 months into his first year, and he really went there. He comes from a strong Catholic family. He really wanted to be a doctor, and he just missed out. And and there was a local priest in town here in Toowoomba that said, "Oh, why don't you go and cool your heels at the seminary?" And so I spotted him that particular day, but unbeknownst to me, he'd also spotted me. And so he would come into the kitchen and make up all these excuses to hang around me, and I was thinking, what is this guy doing? And he was kind of freaking me out a little bit, because I was in this, I hate men, and I'm here so I can get away from them, and I've got this good-looking guy hanging around me.
So a few years later, you're walking in the Queen Street Mall.
I am. So I left the seminary because I was a bit freaked out by this handsome young man and thought, I'm going to hell if I date this guy. And so I left, and I went up to Cairns for a little while and came back, and I was in the Queen Street Mall, and I get a tap on the shoulder, and I turn around, and who should it be but Dan. And as it turns out, we were getting a train to the same station, so we were both headed to Banyo, and I had Eli with me, and Eli and I had this we don't like men routine, and he betrayed me that day on the train. Mr. Eli did. So he was 3, and he was sitting next to me, and Dan was sitting across where you face each other on some of these trains, and so we're talking, and then Eli just looks at me, gives me a little grin, and jumps over and sits next to Dan and starts running this Batman toy up and over him, and I'm looking at Eli, kind of giving him stink eye, like, what do you think you're doing? Get back over here. This isn't the game. And Dan said, do you think it would be okay if I could take Mummy out for dinner? And Eli looked at me and he looked at Dan and said, yes, like this. And like Eli said to me years later, well, you had terrible taste in men, so I had to pick out a good one for you.
So you and Dan did go on to marry, and you have another child, Grace.
Yes.
Yeah. And then sort of when Eli was a teenager, you started to think that maybe he was going off the rails a little bit. What happened there?
Yeah, so our beautiful boy, who Dan and I have both raised as our own, so Dan took him on as his own child. Yeah, just started to show some reckless behaviours. It started when he was about 11. He was school captain in year 12 in Brisbane, and we came back to Toowoomba, and he did not want to come back here. He's like, Mum, this isn't the place for me. But what we found with that experience was the love, support and allyship that came from people like you and others that just absolutely backed us and supported our daughter who was going to school and was kind of wrapped around that, and the love that she received from, it's actually making me emotional, but yeah, from that little school and the people that were in it. There was only one person who was funny about it, and apart from that, everybody else just wrapped us in love, and we got through it.
Yeah. What you failed to say was that Dan came out of the seminary, went and did law, and is this very successful lawyer. And then in the middle of all of that, and we talk about it a lot, you and I, how I think I was attracted to you because I thought that you and Dan, initially I didn't want to have anything to do with you because your lives seemed too shiny, like you're a lovely, good-looking couple with this beautiful daughter, and I I'm not attracted to shiny people. And then I found out you had a lot of complications in your life. Not that was why we became friends, but just the people that are shiny on the outside sometimes, there's a lot more depth in there.
Like life's life, and I don't think anybody gets out of it unscathed. Like, I think there's equal parts sorrow as equal parts happiness, and if you get equal parts, I think you're lucky. Some people get a lot more sorrow, or they have more happiness, but it's all there. I think the shiny people have it too, they just hide it. And then he took himself into remote Aboriginal communities about 5 years ago and worked in Eastern Arnhem Land and gave back and found himself in that space as well. And now he has an amazing business called Connection Works, and he delivers suicide intervention training nationally. So he's a success story, and he lives by the word of his own story, and he connects to people because he has that lived experience, and that's really important. And I've got my baby boy back.
But what happened before you turned 40? You became a grandmother.
Oh, far out. You owe me a glass of wine after this. Yes. So,
such a happiness, though.
Oh, it was. It was a shock. It was a shock. Well, it was the day of my PhD candidature, and so I was nervous. I'm just about to go and present my research question and what I want to do for a PhD at USQ here. And the phone rings, and I'm standing next to my boss, who was this, I want to say he was 7 foot, but I'm exaggerating, but about 6'7", giant Aranda man, so Aboriginal man from Alice Springs, most beautiful human being. And I'm standing next to him. He's, pumping me up and getting me all like ready to go and present my PhD, and the phone rings, and it's Eli. Hi, Mum, how are you going? And I'm like, oh, really good. And I'm thinking he's ringing to tell me good luck. And he goes, you're sitting down, you're going to be a grandmother. Just like that, bang. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm just about to do this. And so I've just sort of bumbled something and and just hung up. Turned to my boss and said, give me a cigarette. I don't smoke. And he goes, you don't smoke? And I said, well, give me one anyway. And so I just sort of bum puffed this thing because I was in shock. I didn't know what to do, and I put it out. And then I went in and I did the PhD presentation, walked back out, and then just it hit me. I'm going to be a grandmother. And yeah, and anyway, I'm blessed with a beautiful little granddaughter. Her name is Sunny, and she's now 15. Yeah, so she's a big girl.
Yeah, Maree, it's such an incredible story. Especially you are working in that same sort of helping people to go to university.
I am, yeah.
Which is kind of, would you say, was what saved you or what put you on the right path?
Absolutely. Well, my grandmother's words, education is so important, dear. Like I never took notice of that, but education is the way out of poverty. Education is the way that you can make a difference, and so that's, for me, everything. And so when I see students coming in and they're studying, I'm there for them every step of the way. And it's important to me that there are more Indigenous kids that are graduating from universities. getting apprenticeships, but growing themselves up so that they don't have to live in poverty.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We have so much more to speak about. I don't know whether this is an insult asking you on Sorry Day, but I always ask my guests who their favourite royal is. Now, you don't have to say a white, but you're going to pass. I'll let you pass. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question I ask is, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Oh, whoa. I love Eagle Rock. There's something about that song. I just go, I got to go and dance to it.
Okay, you're not the type of pulling your pants down.
Well, that's what I was thinking as I was saying that. But I just remember the first time I saw that song, and then all these guys just dropped their dacks, and I'm like, what's happening? So it's kind of a bit of a choose your adventure with it. You don't know what's going to happen, so that's part of the excitement.
A bit like you, Maree, I think. You never know what's going to happen. Maree, thank you so much for being my guest and at such short notice. And I always love hearing your story because it's so inspirational. I hope that you've inspired other people who are listening, and particularly people who might think about encouraging their grandkids to go and do a bridging course to, change their lives. And what are we now? We're only probably 50 now, and you've got so much more to do. Thank you for everything that you do, but also thank you very much for telling your story on Big Little Small Talk.
No worries, it's been a privilege. Thank you.
If anything raised in today's program has raised concerns for you or someone you know, help and support is available 24/7. Please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or visit lifeline.org.au. Or 13 Yarn, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Crisis Support Line on 139276 or visit 13yarn.org.au.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.
You've been listening to a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast. For more podcasts or to listen to live and local Toowoomba radio, please visit 1027.com.au or download the Community Radio Plus app.